This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Get your football scores in a snap with the Apple Sports app. The free app for iPhone gives you access to real-time football scores, a dynamic drive tracker, and live play-by-play, all delivered ultra-fast. Plus, get team and player stats, standings, live betting odds, and more. Designed for speed and simplicity, the Apple Sports app is personalized and puts your favorite leagues, conferences, and teams front and center. Download Apple Sports now in the App Store in the US, Canada, and the UK.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
Hello, and welcome to the second part of our look back at 10 seasons of Formula E. In this part of the show, we'll move on past Gen 1, look at the influx of manufacturers that came into the sport, the second generation of Formula E car, I think probably at the moment my personal fave, how Formula E dealt with COVID and the stuff that went on during the pandemic. And we've got 3 incredibly special guests, the most successful driver in Formula E history, someone who's been around since that very first race in Beijing, and a team owner of a championship winning team. So plenty to get stuck into. Of course, joining me, Andrew Vanderberg, is the race's trusty Formula E correspondent, Sam Smith. Sam, we spent quite a lot of time in the first episode going through that first season and the Gen 1 cars, but what are you most looking forward to talking about when we look at the rest of those 10 years?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture really of how Formula E matured and the second iteration of the rule set. I think, you mentioned it's your personal favourite. I think many people will attest to that as well, and they'll choose the Gen 2 car as the most striking and possibly the one that gave the most dynamic racing. I mean, probably not the closest, because Gen 3 has invented this whole ridiculous form of racing all by itself. But I think... Yeah,
and also the qualifying format we had then sort of went out of its way to stop that, didn't it, a bit?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the story of Formula E, from where we kind of left it with the Gen 1 era and those early pioneering days, really started to gather momentum once the Warner Brothers deal came in. Formula E was essentially saved. It then kicked on. In my mind, there are 2 key factors or 2 key events that really made it. That was one, and the second was the Dieselgate scandal, the Volkswagen emission scandal,
yes,
which I think kind of acted as a bit of an accelerant to the whole ethos of electric racing through marketing. Manufacturers marketing their wares through sport, and Formula E was the only show in town, so it made sense for them to give that a go, and they did. It was a wash with manufacturers as we went through, as it went into Gen 2, and we ended up with BMW, Audi, Mercedes, Renault / Nissan, Jaguar, I've probably missed somebody out, haven't I? But there was a good Porsche, of course, who came in as well. And then there's this sort of roller coaster effect of the dip coming, and the dip came almost concurrently with the pandemic, and the pandemic was a big factor in that. It wasn't the only factor, but it certainly made Formula E recalibrate and sort of understand what it was, where it was, and how it was going to get through this massively challenging period for still a very young sports business. So very interesting period off the track. On the track, again, I just thought the Gen 2 cars brought a visual identity which kind of wowed people, didn't it? I mean, when you looked at that car, you thought, this is something really different. Formula E is really different, and they had innovations such as the attack mode, which came in at the same time. So it was a nice brew, and it was all gathering massive momentum until early 2020.
Well, so let's get stuck into a little bit of that. Obviously, you've written the sort of seminal book on the history and the creation and establishment of Formula E. And that Gen 2 car was a real battle, because what Alejandro Agag wanted and what the FIA were pushing for were quite far apart here. And the FIA had previously really had the whip hand in it, and it's certainly around the Gen 1 car and the way all that went, and it was a bit conservative, small c, whereas Gen 2, Agag sort of had a bit more of his own way, and the flamboyance of the design of that car, it's a real pity we never got to see Gen 2.5, maybe we can talk about that in a little bit, was a sign of the ascendancy of, like you say, how manufacturers and sponsors, let's not forget, they all wanted to show their corporate responsibility and get behind this sustainable type of motorsport, were being attracted by what Formula E had to offer.
Yeah, and the key one, of course, was we didn't have this quirky changing cars. I mean, that just seems so bygone now, doesn't it? That drivers hopped out and
unbelievable,
yeah. I mean, it got to a period in season 4, which was the last year of Gen 1, where it became a farce, actually, and it became a safety issue where, I mean, I won't name names, but I know of 2 drivers who confessed to me that they went out without fully done belts in races, which, you know, this at any level.
Was it Chile where Techeetah and Dragon were done for having those? They were basically cable ties on the belts, weren't they? So they could sort of quick release.
Yeah, they had a little sort of Ersatz quick release or quick doing up and quick release of the of the ties. Yeah, they were essentially tie wraps around a belt and sort of looped around, and I mean, it was a bit pathetic, really, and they were lucky to keep that result, because it was essentially manipulating a safety device. Yeah, and I do remember at Punta del Este, actually, in season 4, that was that great race between Vergne and Di Grassi when they went at it hammer and tongs. But at that race, in the days preceding it, there was an attempt by a couple of drivers to look at possibly going on strike to do with this minimum time that the drivers that was enforced to get this driver change done. Which they it was quite amusing, actually. I think Jean Todt, as he could often be, was fairly blunt on the formation of a possible industrial action, and it was swatted away pretty promptly. But yeah, a few little funny incidents like that, and yeah, I mean, I remember being in Geneva for the Geneva Motor Show and seeing the Gen 2 bin unveiled, and it did look like nothing else. And I think, just going back to your original question about what was needed, Formula E was always something else, wasn't it? It was always something other. And I think at times in Gen 1, with the cars not being particularly quick, okay, they had the curiosity of the driver changes, and they had a few little innovations as well, fan boost and other things which didn't really work, did it? Let's be fair about that. No. They needed something that really wowed people and went, wow, what is that? I remember it being described as a Batmobile type vehicle. Obviously, it had this all-encompassing bodywork, which gave it a sort of single-seater stroke sports car prototype kind of luck as well. And actually what it did was it kind of encouraged some tactical contact, because it was a pretty robust front, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, racing drivers being racing drivers, they did take the piss a lot, and it became more than tactical contact. But at the same time...
Especially when Felipe Massa was driving it. He seemed to be being nerfed into the wall every time I saw him on screen.
Yeah, he did go through a succession of victimized shunts, didn't he? I thought it was all right, but it did get a bit silly on some occasions. I remember the... was it the Zurich race, or was it the Burn? No, it's Burn in season 5, where there was all kinds of mayhem, and they did away with the chicanes. Do you remember that? There was too many chicanes.
Yes.
There was too much contact.
Yeah.
But at least in Gen 2, the thing stayed intact, and they weren't flailed all over the track and littering the circuit. So, yeah, I think just in summary, Gen 2 brought some classic races, some great dices. The ultimate for me was that thrilling Mexico City race between Vergne and Lucas Di Grassi, when Di Grassi came out the last corner sideways, and Vergne hit the 0.0 and lost by half a car's length. I mean, I remember Alan McNish telling me that he had never celebrated a victory like it, and it reminded him of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's last-minute winner in the 1999 Champions League final, which I thought was great. So some good memories, some fine racing, some great champions during Gen 2 as well. Obviously, we had Nick de Vries and Stoffel van Dorn, Antonio Felix da Costa, but we also had Jean-Eric Vergne, who remains the only double champion, and as a result the most successful driver in the history in the last 10 years of Formula E.
Well, we'll hear from Jev a little bit later. Explain a little bit about why we never got to see Gen 2.5 and what it would have been had we have ever seen it.
Yeah, so the evolution of the Gen 2 car was supposed to come in for the 21-22 season, but obviously with what was happening in the world with the COVID-19 pandemic and the disruption that caused, and on so many levels, economies suffering. As a nascent sports business, Formula E had many challenges when that hit in the early spring of 2020, and had to recalibrate. And I think it suffered more than others from a sporting standpoint, because back then the majority of its races were not at permanent circuits, so they were impacted a bit more than others. Formula One got on its feet again pretty quickly through lots of, when you look back at it now, incredible work just to get the sport back in motion of any kind.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about this in a second. It's a sort of proper high horse of mine. But. Yeah.
I mean, Formula E had to pivot quickly. I mean, to be fair to it, it did find a venue in Tempelhof and finish the season, but it was, an amazing achievement by the teams. I don't think anyone can take away what they did in very difficult circumstances, but it was, I don't think it was a satisfactory way to finish a championship, but I don't know of many other alternatives at that stage. This was July of 2020, which is only 3 months after lockdowns first started, or 4 months, and at that stage a lot of the new races that were coming, which were Jakarta, Seoul, London London was coming back on a schedule to that summer, had to wait. They had to wait 1, or in the case of Seoul, 2 years to get back, and Jakarta 2 years to get back on the calendar. So very difficult times, but more was to come, wasn't it? Because later that year there was the bombshell. It was the 3-phased bombshell of Audi, then BMW, and then Mercedes EQ leaving, all within the space of about 8 months, I think. And that was a massive blow. You had this quartet of prestige OEMs flocking to the World Championship, as it then became the season after that, from an official perspective. And 3 of them were gone almost overnight. And that's when the big question started. When you add that to the fact that the first true CEO of the championship, because I don't think we can describe Alejandro Agag as purely a CEO, because he was much more than that. He's founder.
Oh no, that massively understates what he did.
Charismatic driving force, blah blah blah, all those things that we know he did to get the thing off the ground and grow it. Jamie Regal came in, who hadn't been a CEO before. He'd been a chief marketing officer. He'd worked for some, huge sporting franchises and businesses, including Manchester United and the LA Rams. My knowledge of NFL is limited. I think it's the LA Rams, isn't it? The NFL team over on the West Coast. And he brought his own unique style of running Formula E in difficult circumstances, but it just didn't work out, and he was gone by early 2023 as well. So a lot of seismic changes in that sort of 2 to 3 year period after the pandemic, but slowly but surely Formula E got back to somewhere approaching where it had been. I don't think it would.
Oh, do you think so? I don't think it's ever got back to the pre-pandemic level. I think it was on a great accelerated path then, and it totally took the wind out of its sails, and I don't think it's ever recovered that momentum.
No, I mean, the fact that Porsche was the last manufacturer to join the championship, which is
Hey, Lola
troubling.
Yamaha, come on, you're off brand here.
Yeah, I mean, let's call it a prestige OEM. I wouldn't, me, I'd never denigrate the great Lola name. Of course I wouldn't. But, it is a reborn brand after a decade of a fallow decade, and it's not a brand which is instantly recognisable to people beyond motorsport, whereas
Correct.
Obviously Porsche, BMW, Audi are. And Porsche was the last one to enter, which is now 5 years ago. So that adds a lot of grist to your mill in terms of it hasn't recovered. What I mean is that slowly and surely and slightly incrementally, it has got back beyond what it was in 2021, which it was its annus horribilis or mirabilis? I don't know. I didn't do Latin.
Well, I mean,
Did you
either
go
horrible or miserable. You can both of it.
Yeah, you went to a
Miserable
posh school.
horribilis.
Did you do Latin at a posh school? I didn't. But
Certainly did not go to a posh school. I went.
um,
I think it was the 5th worst ranked when the Ofsted reports came out. Lucky to get out alive.
It was a bad year. It was 21. There was the whole energy gate debacle of Valencia. They were racing at places like Puebla. The calendar was a Bitzer calendar, and then they were still recovering. And I think even actually sort of deep into the last season of Gen2, it wasn't quite what you're exactly right. But I think since then, overcoming the difficulties of Gen3, which we'll probably touch on between some of the...
we've got time for that, don't worry.
The chance that we had. It is an extremely convoluted and sort of tumultuous period. And part of me's got a lot of sympathy because a lot of it was out of its hands.
Yes.
And what it did was it was able to sort of modify and pivot and change. But I think in terms of, and I'm not laying this completely on the CEO at the time, Jamie Regal, but there appeared to be a discrepancy in my mind and a lot of people's mind from team principals that I've spoken to and other stakeholders in the championship, a big discrepancy in his style and his vision to what was happening in the world and where things were going. He would argue, and others who were in his administration would argue, well, they drove forward the financial regulations and the cost cap effectively. Well, that had been ongoing since the start of Formula E in reality. Jamie Regal did a fair amount of work to bring it, but it wasn't his, it wasn't his idea per se. I think it was always going to come, but the pandemic naturally brought it forward to the top of the agenda, and they executed and got it in place, which is seismic. That is something which had to be done, not just to get through the immediate post-pandemic years, but just for the future health and stability of the championship.
So what did we miss out on 2.5 then? Because it had a fair bit of bodywork change, but mechanically, was it any different?
I remember it as being fairly cosmetic. I think I mean, I'm actually quite happy that they didn't bring it in, because I remember this. One of those big fins at the back. The engine cover was like fin-like.
Yes.
And to me, that was just, even then in 2021, was out of date. To me, it looked like a GP2 car from 2009 or something. There was this.
I agree. It was a step back visually.
I think so, and I think the amount of money they saved, and the amount of heartache, and the amount of, frankly, the time and sort of inclination of it at that period, when a lot of other big things were happening and had to be decided, and the kind of very future of the championship was often being questioned, whether it could survive something as huge and as debilitating as the pandemic for a new sports business. It wasn't in the position of Formula One, or it wasn't in the position of the Premier League, or more mature sports businesses that could adapt and survive.
No, and I get it, and I am sympathetic, but I do think that 6 races at Tempelhof was a very box-ticky, cynical way of ensuring that they made their contractual obligations. It didn't show an enormous amount of creativity and endeavour, did it? And I know the situations they face, and I know how hard it was with the street circuits and whatever, but I can't believe that was the only possible solution, when Formula One is literally trailblazing around the world, working in these incredible bubbles and all of this to bring it back. And this is the point where Formula One takes off, right? They had an amazing COVID, because there was no new TV being watched. People just binge watched Drive to Survive, and there was no sport on, and then all of a sudden Formula One's on there, and the racing's pretty good. And so they, at a time when they had a captive audience, right? People had nothing to do; they were sitting around all day, and to do 6 races around, and I like Tempelhof, but it doesn't look good, right? It's one of the drabbest backgrounds that you can have for a race when it's just a load of concrete blocks in the middle of a grey airfield. I can see why it didn't turn people on.
I tell you what, I bet it looked a hell of a lot worse after 10 days have been there.
Yeah.
I think some people have still got PTSD over that summer of spending 10 days at Tempelhof in seclusion and isolation. I mean, blimey. Yeah. Well, thankfully, the media weren't allowed to be there. Lots of funny stories about the almost 2 weeks there, actually, that many of which can't be told publicly. But there was some let's say some relaxed notions as to some of the rules that were going on in and around Tempelhof, in terms of people meeting up and saying hello, etc. But that's one for another decade. Maybe in 10 years' time we can write about that, when people have left the paddock. But no, I think seriously, I think it maybe when you say that Formula One did such a good job, I would counter that with, yes, they did, but they didn't do it on a street track and couldn't do that on a street track. Whereas then the majority of circuits that Formula E knew and had deals with and associations with were either pop-up street tracks or places like Monaco, which there was just no chance of putting a race on in any time in 2020. And I think the first street track that Formula One went back to was probably Baku, wasn't it, in 22? I'd have to check that, but they didn't go back to a street race for a while.
Was there a Singapore?
I don't think there was a Singapore until 22, was there? So I'd have to fact check that, but certainly, I mean, it was always going to be difficult for Formula E because of the fact that most of their calendar was associated or had used street circuits. And the other thing was, it just didn't have the resources in terms of depths of teams. Yes, it had a good liaison and working structure with the FIA, but having spoken to people like who did I speak to at that time? Scott Elkins, Fred Espinoz, who was a colleague of yours for a while, wasn't he, at Formula E? I would say they did an amazing job collectively to get anything on that summer. It wasn't perfect. It was the same circuit, but they did do different iterations of track. Remember, that is a big operational job. So I'm a rare defence of Formula E from me there. I think they did what they had to do. They just had to swallow it and get it done. Da Costa won the championship. Absolutely deserved it, but I think for Antonio, part of his thrust and motivation now is to win another one, to say, look, I won one in exceptional circumstances, and you can't take that away from me, and no one can. But it actually wasn't a designated world championship then, was it? De Vries
Correct.
was the first true world championship status in all, it's all but name, I suppose. But I would think that Da Costa's got more motivation to get a second title, just to quell any doubters as to what it takes to win a genuine, multifaceted world title.
Well, that sounds like a good segue into talking to somebody who knows exactly what it's like to win the Formula E Championship. So much so that he's won it twice. So you caught up with Jean-Eric Vergne in Austin, wasn't it, with the WEC race? Is that where you recorded this interview?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I had a really good chat with Jean-Eric. He was in very good form, as you'll listen to in a second. Fascinating character. I've always enjoyed spending time with Jev. He is he's kind of a composite of the modern driver in my mind. Ultra professional, very driven. He desperately loves the sport, but he's got a relationship with it which can blow hot and cold. I think he'd admit that himself.
Well, I mean, that's Jev in a nutshell. Really.
Yeah, I mean, a really interesting character. When you actually take the effort to get to know him a bit, and he knows your face, and you get to a level of trust, I suppose, in conversation terms. And he does genuinely love racing, and he talks about it in great detail. He's extremely sharp and a savvy professional, and he's got I think Verne, when he finishes, I think he'll become a really shrewd operator, not necessarily within a team environment, although he did a bit of that with the early days of DS Techeetah, which he talks about here, but also just the sort of business side and the let's call it the economic side. He really understands the how the industry works, and as he talks about here, his journey through Formula E, which started off at a really sort of low-key level when he rocked up at Punta del Este in December 2014, to where it is now, where he's still a top-line performer, has had a lot of bumps along the way, but he's learnt a hell of a lot. So it's fascinating to get this perspective from Formula E's only double champion.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Get your football scores in a snap with the Apple Sports app. The free app for iPhone gives you access to real-time football scores, a dynamic drive tracker, and live play-by-play, all delivered ultra-fast. Plus, get team and player stats, standings, live betting odds, and more. Designed for speed and simplicity, the Apple Sports app is personalized and puts your favorite leagues, conferences, and teams front and center. Download Apple Sports now in the App Store in the US, Canada, and the UK.
Thursday Night Football is on, and it's only on Prime Video.
Picked off at the 1-yard line.
This week, it's the boys versus the G-men as the Dallas Cowboys battle the New York Giants.
This is unbelievable.
Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern with TNF Tonight, presented by Verizon. Not a Prime member? Sign up for a 30-day free trial to stream the game. It's the Cowboys and the Giants, Thursday at 7, only on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details.
Jean-Eric, thanks very much for joining us in this 10th anniversary celebration of Formula E. A decade ago, it seems remarkable that you stepped into that paddock in Punta del Este and drove for Andretti, starting a journey which ended in 2 World Championships and many victories, and a long and prosperous career in this all-electric championship. I mean, taking you back to that time, it was a sort of pivotal time for you because a big crossroads in your career. we've talked before about you entering the championship in that season with Andretti. On the track, fantastic achievement, taking pole position and kick-starting your Formula E career. But how were you at that stage of your career? Because as I said, it was a tough time, wasn't it? Lots of changes going on for you in your professional circumstances there.
Yeah, there was a lot of change. Obviously, when you leave F1, the way I left it was I was probably not in the best state of mind when I arrived in F3, especially in the championship that had just started. Didn't know if it was going to continue. There was a lot of rumors that the championship may also end up only after 3 races around the Miami race. So, it's not something that I really took seriously in thinking, okay, I'm going to make a career out of, that championship. I had no idea if it was going to exist. But after a couple of races, I mean, I felt that it was a nice place to be. The paddock was very friendly. You could feel that everybody was part of something small that could potentially become quite big, and everybody, really enjoyed themselves in the paddock between the drivers, the team, the people also from Formula E, Alejandro, Alberto, all those guys, and it was a very nice group to be part of. And 10 years later, we still are. It's a much bigger championship, a lot more serious as well, probably less friendly than what it used to be 10 years ago, but. It's the way it should be, and in the end, very happy. I made that. I wouldn't say it was a conscious decision, but that decision, to join the championship, and it turned out to be quite good.
So when were you happy in Formula E in terms of those early years? Because you went to DS Virgin, that was difficult. It was a tough year for you, and it didn't go particularly well. Didn't end that well. But then you formed this new entity with Mark Preston, and I know Julian Jacobi was involved initially in that, and you were very much involved in orchestrating it, getting a lot of the constituent parts of that deal together. Was that really when it started to take off for you, season 3?
Yeah, I think this is when it really started to take off. After 2 years in the championship, I still hadn't won a race, and it's been 5 years. It had been 5 years since I haven't won anything, since basically I started F1. So it was a moment where I lost a lot of confidence in myself. Was I good enough to still do it? Was I good enough to win a race? Was I good enough to win a championship? And obviously, it was quite probably the lowest point in my career in that second season with Virgin. But decided to take the bull by the horn, and went on trying to purchase a team, trying to find the investors, and in the end we made a deal, with the Chinese, with CMC, Seka, and Mark Preston, and. I got a lot more involved in the team, and going on the other side of the fence, I was able to also understand what the team needed, from the driver. And this is the moment where my motivation started to go back up again, and confidence started to restore also, because I had a very good environment around me in that team. And after the first win at the end of season 3. This is the moment where I was like, okay, now I know we can win more races. I know we can win the championship. We have the car, we have the people. I know I'm still good, and that's what we've done after. I mean, we won five world championship between drivers and teams. I won 2. Antonio won the third title, and another 2 manufacturer championship, and it was those were fantastic years, and it really. It's thanks to those years that I am where I am today, and it was a good time.
I've seen each of your wins in Formula E. What stands out for you? What was the one that you remember? You had that breakthrough in Montreal, of course, but many came after it. I mean, there was that epic duel with Degrassi at Punter, I remember. But you must have one to choose from.
I think the most emotional one was by far the race in Paris. My whole family was there, and my friends. It's the city where you grow up, and you win in front of the Eiffel Tower. It was very special, especially racing for DS. I know I didn't have DS back then, but it was I was not with DS yet. But it was an emotional win, this one.
And when you look at your title years, you won. I mean, you did something which every racing driver, well, very few racing drivers do, which is win back-to-back titles. I mean, how did that what did it take out of you and the team? Because that's a major push and achievement to accomplish, to do that. Not only that, but you did it with 2 different rule sets. So while you were winning in season 4, you're developing this new Gen 2 car, and you go and win it in the first season of Gen 2 as well. That's quite unique in racing.
I don't think it's unique in racing. I mean, when you look in different categories, as long as the motivation is still there, and I guess winning a championship is maybe the goal for many drivers. And I know that for me, winning a championship is not what I mean. It's of course what you want, but it's I want to do more than that. So you win the championship, and you go back to work, forgetting about that win, and you put yourself in at the same level of every other drivers, understanding that everybody else, you have a target on your back, and you need to work even harder to retain that position. And probably the mistake that some drivers do when they win the championship, they feel untouchable, and this is the moment where it can get a bit tough. And I think that's what happened with me and Antonio after winning 2 years. The third year we still had a good car to win. Didn't happen that year, and I think I had a teammate that was simply better, more hungry, and it was a good reminder that there is always somebody that is hungry for more and that wants what you have. And if you're not the one that has the highest motivation on the circuit, then this is the moment where you can lose the edge and lose the championship, and that's what happened.
Sounds like you learned quite a lot about yourself through that period of Gen 2 in particular. I mean, success, you enjoy success, but you also learn a lot from trying to maintain it as well. I mean, has it been a good sort of case study for you as a person? You've kind of matured a lot in the last decade. Do you feel like yourself?
I mean, for sure, I know what it requires to win. I know what it's required to keep winning and to always be on front. And what I'm learning those 3 years, that is requires also a good car, which is not what I have at the moment. I mean, I have a good car, but not good enough to fight with all the time with the Jags and the Porsche and to fight for the championship. And it's been now a few years that I don't have the car, so it's not that I'm impatient, but I know that I have everything else that's required to win championship, and I hope that very soon we're gonna have again a good car to win championships, and that's what we all work together as a team. And I mean, my motivation is still intact; it's still extremely high. I don't feel the talent is disappearing anytime soon. But as long as the motivation's high, I know that we can do it. But we need the team, we need the people behind. I mean, it's even though you're alone in the car, there is always a lot of people behind you, from building the powertrain to the software and all the strategy and the engineers, and it requires a whole team working together to be able to win. It's not only yourself.
Formula E is a continual growth in terms of technically, sportingly, roadmaps and so forth. We saw the advent of Gen 3. I think you were reasonably public in that project not being to your particular liking as a driver. The Gen 3 Evo, you've been having some days, I presume, this summer, and the development will continue with the Evo. From a technical perspective, you've got a bit more traction in terms of how you use the front MGU, and you've got different tyres. Are you sort of feeling a bit more, not confident, but are you enjoying driving these cars a little bit more now?
Yeah, that's for sure. I think the four-wheel drive makes a big difference, and the car is becoming a lot more enjoyable to drive. The tires doesn't change anything. I mean, it's a tiny bit more grip, but yeah, I'm not gonna say anything bad about it. But the step that I was expecting with the tires is not really. It's not been the step that I was expecting. But on term of technical side, the four-wheel drive makes a big difference. That's gonna change also the way we race. I don't know how yet. We need to do the work and do the findings and seeing how we're gonna be racing those cars. But yeah, I mean, it's still enjoyable. I think I've seen also what wanted to be done for Gen 4, and I think that looks very promising. maybe Gen3 may not have been the best car, but I think everybody, from Formula E organization to the FIA, I think came to the realization of certain things, and I can see that they realize it, and they are, I think, going in the right direction. So which is nice to see. Everybody can do a mistake. Everybody can maybe not choose the best car or the best technical regulation, but as long as people realize it and change for a better future, I think that's all that matters. And I would say that 2 years ago I was maybe not too optimistic about the FE cars, but with all the changes and all the people involved at the moment and all the partners, I think it makes me very hopeful of the future. And we need fast cars. I think that's a key element. And as long as they're giving us faster car, I think we're in the right direction.
It's been such a big part of your career, like I said, pretty much a decade now. The time will come when you're not driving anymore. Do you have any thought or motivation or interest in continuing your involvement with Formula E in some way? I don't know. The obvious one is either a team owner or a team principal or some part of a squad. Have you given that any thought, Jeff, for the next phase of your life?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've been more than just a driver in that championship. In the days of Tichita, I mean, I was doing a lot more than that. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of what needs to be done in the team to be successful. Of course, it's getting more and more difficult as the competition is rising up, and now we have fantastic teams, and it's very difficult to be winning in FE. So I think team owner or team principal could be an option, but then again, I don't think I'm quite there yet. And as I said, as long as I have the motivation and that I keep performing well, I will want to continue. And when I see some drivers that are across 40s and still doing well, I'm still very hopeful that I have another, 8-10 years ahead of me. So with no issue. But let's see. It's still a long time to go. Maybe another generation of Formula E will come before I stop racing, and I have quite a bit of time to understand what I will want to do. But for sure, it's not like I know many other things in life. I know motorsport very well. When you've been doing something for all your life, and especially racing in Formula E for since the inception of that championship, you get to understand the politics, you get to understand who does what, and having that level of understanding will definitely help me to do anything else in that championship.
Okay, final couple of questions, lighter ones for you. Teammates, you had an array of teammates in Formula E. I think pretty much you've had good relationships with the majority of your teammates, all of them in fact. Sam Bird, briefly Sarrazin, obviously you had Andre and Da Costa and Stoffel more recently. Of those teammates, who's the one that you got along the best with? Who's the one that you enjoyed spending time with as a teammate, as a friend, and as a sort of confidant?
Honestly, all of them. Sarrazin was a very nice teammate. I got along with him very well, but then, he went off, from the Formula E radar, so I didn't get the chance to see him much. Andre, became one of my closest friends. Stoffel as well. Spent some good time also with Antonio. I'm very good friend with everybody. Got along very well with Sam as well. But maybe the Stoff and Andre are the closest friends in terms of teammates. And I never thought that it was possible to be friends with a teammate, but it proved out to be untrue. Doesn't matter that when you're on the track, you still want to beat him, and there is no friends. But there is, as long as there is respect, I think that's the most important. Between teammates, you need to have the respect. You don't need to be friend or whatever, but you're representing a brand, a team, and sometimes you have to let the ego a bit on the side for the best of the team. And if one day your teammate is better than you, and that you have to let him pass in the race, then it's up to me to to understand why he was better and to improve. And the day I'm better than him, then he would pay back what has been done. But most important is respect, and I think with all of my teammates, we earn the respect, the mutual respect, and from that moment it's all good.
So come on, tell us a funny anecdote, a funny story of you and Andre. You sort of developed a bit of a cult status on social media with the, what do they call it, Jean-Andre, was that right?
Jean-Andre, yeah.
Hashtag Jean-Andre. I mean, come on, tell us a funny story, a broadcastable story of Andre. I mean, what did he...
Yeah, that's the issue. I don't think anybody is broadcastable.
But he's obviously he's in the paddock here at WEC as well. So you continue your
I mean, we see each other during the holidays as well. So I don't think I can say much.
No, all right, we'll leave that for the censors for a later podcast then, Jeff. Final one.
When I finish my career, maybe we can say a few things.
In your memoirs. Yeah.
Yes.
In terms,
maybe if I write a book one day.
Well, I'm available to ghostwrite it for you for,
okay,
good.
That
a
would
good
be
fee. So we'll sort that out afterwards. One circuit, so many circuits in Formula E. I mean, the ones I remember are places like Rome, obviously. Bern, I thought was a great little track. You won there. Even sort of slightly wackier ones. I mean, Hong Kong was a bit unique. One track that you'd like to take, let's say Gen2 car, because I think we all agree that the Gen2 car was probably the best so far. What
I haven't said that. You said that.
I said that. Yeah, putting those words in your mouth. Which track would you like to do a full 350 on? Any track that's been used in Formula E since the start that you've raced on in FE?
There's been quite a lot. There was one track that I really liked, and unfortunately, I don't think we can go back there for a bit of time. It was Moscow. That was a very nice location, amazing, and the track was quite cool. Otherwise, Punta del Este was nice, but once again, maybe I liked more the surrounding than the track itself. I don't know. I mean, as long as there is Monaco, I think is my favorite circuit in the FE calendar. I think we were good.
Well, you won there as well as many other tracks. So, thanks for looking back on your career in Formula E. Jeff,
you're welcome.
Hopefully for a few more seasons. Good luck for season 10, and thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So you and Jeff made your Formula E debut at the same time. He came along, whacked it on pole. You came along and drank some lovely Malbec by the harbour side.
Yeah, and got you to pay for it. Fantastic. Yeah, it was a great weekend. I imagine that I had considerably more Malbec than Jeff had that weekend. Or who knows? I don't know. He does like his wine, does Jeff, but probably not.
There was a big party on that Saturday night.
I believe there was, yes. I didn't frequent it as we were doing our industrial Malbec drinking, as you mentioned.
I think he is almost certainly, and I'm willing to put up quite a strong defence of this, the best Formula E driver. And you look back over those 10 seasons, won in every type of car, constantly. He's had some incredible teammates, but has always ended up coming out on top against them. That one season with Da Costa aside, I think, for me, he's the current number one in the all-time list of Formula E greats. What do you say to that?
I would agree. I think it's close from the thing. I think the sort of the 5 drivers probably that you put in that conversation, and taking out some of the.
Go on then. Who else you chucking in the mix?
Well, I think Buemi has to be in there.
Best Gen 1 driver.
Yeah, absolutely. But just taking it as a whole, he had one really bad season with Nissan, but actually when you dig down into some of his other seasons with Nissan, he was in a poor package and made the most of it and still got podiums and a win in New York in season 5 at the start of Gen 2. Gen 3 hasn't been particularly kind to him, but on his day he still got the pace and he still got the desire to be there and to challenge at the front when he can. I think you've got to put Di Grassi in there for a number of reasons. I think he's got more of a percentage outside of the actual sporting dynamic. You know, he brings so much more to Formula E and the
Yes.
awareness of what it is.
He's ultimately the definitive Formula E driver, isn't he?
He is. He's got to be considered that as well. Yeah, absolutely. I think Mitch Evans, although he's not won a title, he's won many EPrix, and he's always been at the sharp end, and will be a champion pretty soon. I know we say that every year, but he will be. He can't not be. He can't not be. So I think
Surely not.
Yeah, I think you put, and then I think, although he didn't win much, so you've then got your other champions. Obviously, Da Costa's a significant presence, and what he's brought with multiple teams and multiple manufacturers, and he's still got much to give as well. He's only 33, so he's got at least 2 or 3 really good years ahead of him, and who knows what he can do with Porsche next season after a very difficult, although successful, difficult campaign, or most of it, or half of it, sorry, for the season just gone. But then there's drivers for me that, you know, Felix Rosenqvist is one where you think, you know, I used to go out on this circuit occasionally in that period at the end of Gen 1 when Felix was driving, and he was just on a sort of different level in terms of reflex and hammering the car and getting closer to walls, and he was phenomenal for that sort of golden period of 6 months in season 4. And I think there's a good argument to suggest that if Mahindra had a more reliable car that season, that Rosenqvist could have challenged Vergne more than Sam Bird did for that title at the end of season 4. He had 3 mechanical failures, 2 of which he was leading races. I think certainly in Mexico, and I think in Rome he was very well positioned, and he could have got an extra sort of 60, 70 points from that season had it not been for poor reliability and things going awry. He's one that stands out in that kind of bracket underneath the drivers that I mentioned there. And then you've got drivers for the future, the immediate future, like Nick Cassidy. Jake Dennis, of course, did great things. The Mercedes pair of Stoffel Vandoorne and Nick De Vries took titles, didn't they? And were always major forces. So there's probably a good dozen drivers that you would say are right up there. But if you're going to talk about a sort of elite league, 2 titles, really taking a new team by the scruff of the neck, and Techeetah was a bit of a joke in the first sort of 4 or 5 races of its existence.
Do you remember those first couple of races where they didn't send them out in time for his pole position run? And there was another thing where did he go onto the grid with something missing or some setting not put right?
There was a whole host of things. Yeah, there was a whole host of things like
something
that.
Happened in Marrakesh that was ridiculously comical.
Yeah. I mean, there were so many mistakes, and the team hadn't formed properly. It was a bit of a state, really, and then they sort of hit their straps halfway through that season, and then Jev won in Montreal, didn't he? And it all started to come alive, and then they won the title with the customer Renault engines. Then the DS deal was done, and to win back-to-back titles, as Jev alluded to in that chat, it was a tough one, and he managed to do it. But I think a lot of it goes down to him informing a unit where he could prosper, and the high achieving Jean-Eric Vergne was able to come out and take those 2 titles. You know, and he more or less had the better of a very experienced, very wily teammate in Andre Lotterer, who arguably, I think, probably is the best overall Formula E driver not to win a race. You know, call him what you want.
Yeah, it's him and Heidfeld, isn't it?
Yeah,
of course, it has to be Heidfeld. He's in every best to not win anything conversation.
I think you can call it, the Chris Amon of Formula E or whatever you want to label it as. But I think there's so many great drivers have brought different dimensions, and I think you'll share this because you work with a lot of them in the first three seasons or 3.5 seasons. A real good spread of individuality and different characters as well. You could say that about any grid, but I think Formula E was a really good one when it wasn't forced. You remember at Monaco in season 1 when whoever thought of it should have known better to try and force the Piquet and Di Grassi loathing into something.
I would like to say I tried very hard to make that not happen.
Yeah, you can't force or you can't script those things. They kind of happen organically, don't they? I mean, the best one of recent years is Dennis and Verline, isn't it? You get a great little rivalry there, and it gets a bit of needle, but
Yes.
it happens naturally.
That's authentic.
Yeah, you can't put on a pantomime, can you? You can try, but you just look a bit stupid doing it. So yeah, good range of drivers. We talked a bit in the first one, didn't we, about some of the bit part players and the bizarre signings for one-off cameos and so forth. But yeah, you don't get that so much now. But the quality.
No, when you were mentioning Punter the other day, I suddenly remembered that Jacques Villeneuve did 3 races, including that very, very, very ill-starred performance at Punter where he smacked the car up on the second lap, or was it the opening lap?
Yeah.
And then they rebuilt it so he could do the test. And he did the same.
Yeah, Two Tubs Jack, as he was known that weekend. I think he'd been on the Malbec, hadn't he, that weekend? I mean, it was pretty comprehensive, the Trail of Destruction, and then it was no surprise that he was on his way after that in his typical nomadic way. I hope Glenn Freeman's not listening to this podcast. We should have a little,
I'm not sure Glenn listens to the Formula E podcast, mate.
Probably not. But yeah, some interesting drivers over the years. I'm just trying to think of some that sort of were some curiosities. I mean, Esteban Gutierrez was an odd one. Absolutely clear from the very first time that I talked to him that he had absolutely no motivation or interest in Formula E at any stage in his 4 appearances.
Did he do 2
it was.
Races before? Or was it 3 that he did?
Yeah, it wasn't.
And
it
then,
wasn't.
I'm
many.
going off to do Champ Car, and then did 1 race, and that was it.
With Dale Coyne, wasn't it? He hurt himself, didn't he? Didn't he shunt it and hurt himself? I mean, you can't come into something as competitive as Formula E with a level of, arrogance, really, that it's below or belittling you. And I think actually Verne did that, and he alluded to that in his chat with us there. And if you're intelligent, you change your opinion pretty quickly because you know it's a competitive championship, irrespective of the hardware that you had, particularly in Gen 1. And then when it became more serious, you ended up with really high-quality drivers who should have got a crack at F1, Evans, Rosenqvist, Freins, drivers who were, ultra-competitive and were in the early stages of making, major and successful professional careers out of their dashed F1 dreams, let's say. And it's quite an interesting place to be, to see psychologically how the drivers pick themselves up from that and transition into becoming really good pros. And I think we're now, certainly for the last 4 or 5 seasons, the strength in depth and the quality of Formula E has been world class. There aren't many championships in the world where you got that strata of just proper, quick pros who get the job done for big manufacturers and big independent teams. And it's just a nice environment to be around, that competitive environment, because if you are off it, or if you're not in your head's in the right place, then you're going to get found out pretty quickly.
Oh, well, when the worst team on the grid's lineup is Dan Ticktum and Sergio Sette Camara, I think that tells you about the strength in depth. But one driver, Sam, that you have completely overlooked, who definitely deserves a shout, it's the joint second most successful driver in terms of race wins, and that's Sam Bird, one of the OGs. They're from that very first Beijing race, and we caught up with Sam. We actually, you all notice when you listen to this that Nicky Shields was with us when we recorded this interview, so that might help you with the timeline if you've listened to the first episode of this doubleheader.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
George Clooney and Brad Pitt's new movie Wolves is on Apple TV Plus September 27th.
That's where I want you to be now.
So if you want to see George Clooney and Brad Pitt, go to Apple TV Plus.
You got to start the story there.
Or if you want to see Brad Pitt and George Clooney, go to Apple TV Plus.
I am enjoying the show.
And if you want to see their new movie Wolves,
you can't do it, I'm going to help you out. I can do it. So do it.
Definitely go to Apple TV Plus.
Admit it, it's cool. Okay, fine, it was very cool.
Wolves, streaming September 27th on Apple TV Plus. Rated R.
Well, we'll be delighted to be joined now by someone who's been basically a permanent fixture of Formula E for these past 10 seasons, a race winner and fought for multiple championships, and that's Sam Bird. Sam, welcome aboard.
Thank you for having me, guys.
So back in 2014, is it fair to say that Formula E saved your career?
I think it's very fair to say that, Andrew. So 2014 it started off as a really tricky year. At the end of 2013, I had aspirations of being a Formula One racing driver. I'd just come second in GP2, got pipped at the end, won a load of races that year, was doing well, but some things happened in the background that meant that was never going to be the case. Looking back, maybe it was, even if I'd won that championship, I don't think I would have ever got close to a race seat, unfortunately, in Formula One. And it was getting very late in the day with regards to race seats in IndyCar. I went over to America to speak to a lot of IndyCar teams, but they were looking for money. I didn't have any money. So I came back from that trip from America and I was thinking, right, what on earth am I going to do? I had a shootout for Ferrari to be the Ferrari works driver, and that was alongside Jerome D'Ambrosio and James Collado. And it went really well. It was then a shootout. They chose not to invite Jerome back again for a second test. Me and James went on a second test to Vallelunga, and the test went really well. And I was pulled aside by Amato after the test, and I was told, look, don't say anything yet, but we've made our decision. For you, it's good news. Wait 1 week, and then we'll make the announcement. So I thought, great, I've got the Ferrari gig. You know, I've got a job. Anyway, a week went past and I got a call from Amato saying, look, we need 24 hours. Something's happened. We will get back to you. Anyway, 24 hours later, they'd chosen James. And it turns out that James has been incredible for Ferrari. And that's proven probably a wise choice for Ferrari because James has been brilliant. But again, another door was slammed in my face. So then I was like, what on earth am I going to do here? It seems like I've got so close to everything, yet I still don't have a job. At this point, I've got bills to pay that were unpaid. My electricity got shut off in my apartment. I couldn't afford my rent, and I called mum and dad in tears saying, look, it's over. I'm going to have to go back to school or go to a college, get some form of degree in personal training. I'm going to be a personal trainer. But within 24, 48 hours of that, Alex Ty, the then boss of Virgin Racing, called me and told me that he was going to be the boss of this new team in a new series called Formula E. Now, we all remember certain articles about Formula E at the beginning, people saying what it was and was it going to sink, was it going to swim? But it was a job offer. I went to London and fortunately, I got a job. which was great. And I was like, wow, I'm still racing. I'm still a racing driver. I was alongside a guy called Jaime Alguersuari. And that was the beginning for me. I had no idea how the series was going to go. I don't think anybody did at this stage. And this was the beginning of the early phase of 2014. But I was a racing driver, and I was in a bona fide championship alongside some other great drivers who had signed for this series.
When you got to Donington and the cars sort of rolled out properly for the first time, did you sort of question your choices at that point? Because it's fair to say that initial test or two, I mean, they were running really slow and they weren't running brilliantly. Did you think maybe you put your eggs in the wrong basket?
It's fair to say that the series has come quite a long way, hasn't it? But yeah, compared to what I had been driving, compared to F1 cars, GP2 cars, they were slow initially. They were. And nobody really knew how to extract the maximum from an electric vehicle at that point. With Virgin Racing, we basically got taken over by the demo team at Renault F1. And there were a lot of good people there, but there were also a lot of guys who I think it would be fair to say they'd been tasked with this and it wasn't really their cup of tea. So they weren't really putting their heart and soul into the project. And it was identified quite quickly that they shouldn't really be running the cars. A guy called Patrick Coury came in at the end of testing and completely transformed the team, to be fair to Patrick, who now works for Jaguar TCS Racing. He became my race engineer, and he changed the philosophy and really gave the team a little bit of a direction. And he was a key element to getting that team up and running very quickly from nowhere. I mean, we were a backmarker team running very, very slowly in those opening tests, and we were completely lost. And if it weren't for Patrick coming in, I don't think I would have had the success early doors in season 1 and season 2 that I had.
What was the sort of eureka moment back then? Because initially, people were still running them like they were conventional racing cars, and the knowledge gap about how to use regens and batteries and all of this was miles away from what it is now. When did that flip?
Well, for myself and for Virgin Racing back then, it was when Patrick came in. Before Patrick came in, I remember we did a mock race around Donington because the series needed to do these mock races to see how it would work because nobody had a clue. And at the time, my race engineer at the time was like, right, well, we need to drive flat out for the entire race. So the only way to do that is to drive around 110 kilowatts, which was basically effectively the shakedown mode.
Yeah.
And I wasn't that keen on that. I thought that I'd tried some things in testing whereby I'd run at full power and then lift off down the straight, that would be a quicker way of doing it. But anyway, we did what the engineer wanted, and I got lapped by Catherine Legg on this mock race, and it was quite demoralizing that particular day. I remember it well. But then when Patrick came in, things changed pretty quickly.
Sam, I love the story of how you first started in Formula E. I don't know whether you remember that one of the first times we met at Donington, you were driving, I think, your brother's Polo. He'd borrowed.
Yeah, I couldn't afford. Well, I didn't. I couldn't afford a car, so I rocked up at Donington. My brother was, I think, just 17 at the time. Hadn't passed his test yet, but Mum and Dad had bought him a car in preparation for him passing his test. He'd got a 1-litre Polo, and
it's about the same as 110 kilowatts then.
Yeah, exactly. And I would cane this thing to within an inch of its life up and down motorways. I don't think it was possible to get a speeding ticket in this car, but it was flat. It was flat out everywhere. So yeah, I was struggling at that point. Do you know what as well, guys? I remember. So this is going forwards a little bit in time. Our first race obviously was Beijing, and I'm sure you guys will want to get to Beijing very soon. But after Beijing and after the race that I had, I was I'd landed back at Heathrow, and I'd booked myself a taxi to get from Heathrow back to my little apartment in Hersham. And luckily, it was my next door neighbor that was my taxi driver. He ran a taxi firm. Anyway, he dropped me off, and he told me how much it would be. And I went to a cash point that was 100 meters away from my apartment. And I didn't have, how embarrassing, I didn't have the fund. I was holding a trophy from this race to the other side of the world, and I couldn't pay him. So I had to do an IOU to the taxi man because I didn't have enough money in my account to pay him. How embarrassing is that?
I hope you've paid the favour back then. So
I paid him back. I did pay him back.
Well, talking of, some brilliant moments that you've had over your career, I mean, 11 wins, quite something. You are one of the most consistent drivers in Formula E. But out of all of those moments, all of those wins, standing on the top step, could you pick a favourite? Which one really was the best?
Oh, gosh. Could I pick a favourite? There's probably a couple that stand out. Obviously, the first one was special. To get your first win in a new series is always fun, and the manner at which we did it in Putrajaya season 1, nobody, including myself, I didn't expect that from my car, from us as a team, and from myself in the second race of Formula E. To go, I think, 2 laps longer than everybody while leading and pulling a gap and just making the second stint very, very simple and straightforward. And having a lead of over 10 seconds was I still can't believe that. But that was very special. And then I'd probably, the doubleheader in New York was great, really special. But then the latest one, I'd say the latest one with Neon McLaren, simply because I felt written off, and I felt like I was set for the scrap heap of racing drivers, and it was like a "I've still got it, guys" moment. The fact that I overtook Mitch, controlled the race for most of the race, overtook Mitch, who's regarded as probably the most consistent and fastest driver in Formula E, around the outside with a corner to go was great. And to get Neon McLaren's first Formula E victory was really, really special. In Brazil, home of Senna, I had Fittipaldi waving the flag 50 years after he'd won McLaren's first ever world championship. It's like the stars aligned, and it was a great moment.
Sam, when you look back at your main title tilt, which was season 4, you had still a pretty big gap to make up on Jev, who was really strong that season. You'd partnered Jev in that season too. I know it was a tricky season for him. What was your relationship like with Jev? It always seemed to be good. There was that one famous incident in Paris where it got a bit feisty. But how do you look back on that title tilt with Jev back in 2018?
Oh, the title fight with Jev was great fun. Look, the relationship with Jev in season 2, it was challenging because we as people, we're not just racing drivers. We as people, we go through difficulties in our lives. Now, Jev was going through a certain period in his life that was challenging. And I think that because I was his teammate, I bore the brunt of that. And that became a little bit challenging towards the end of the championship. And that's all that was. But once he was out of that period in his life and he was a happier person, me and him have got on like a house on fire. So the season 4 fight was fun. It was fair. It was disappointing in the way that, we'd gained momentum with, basically a 2-season-old rear end. Managed to get ourselves into this position where we were fighting for a championship, but through consistency and hard work. And then we got on the simulator ready for New York, thinking, well, I did the double in New York the year before. We could be on for something great. And then we tried a race run, and we're like, oh no, we're so inefficient around this track. We're never going to win. We're just never going to be anywhere near. Obviously, we couldn't really tell anybody that, but we were nowhere in New York, and it was demoralizing to go there knowing that, we'd need a miracle to stand on a podium, let alone win a championship.
You'd sort of made that team your own, and then obviously the move to Jaguar came up. How much of a wrench was it to move the teams, and ultimately why do you think it didn't really work out for you at Jaguar?
It was Virgin, then DS Virgin, then Envision in its different guises. Yeah, that was what I saw as my racing home. But sometimes in order to grow, I felt that I needed to try somewhere new. At the time, I felt like I needed to be with a manufacturer, and Jaguar were very interested. The offer was great. I felt like they were doing and saying the right things in order to become one of the top teams in Formula E. So for me at the time, it was an easy sell and an easy choice. Why didn't it work at Jaguar? Well, I'll be totally honest, guys. I've just said it about Jev. Now, I went through something that was very difficult in my personal life. I've been through quite a challenging, difficult, and emotional divorce that has stretched me financially, emotionally. And it's very difficult as a driver to focus 100% when you've got stuff going on in your head constantly as well. And that's just me being brutally honest. I as a person struggled during that phase to focus 100% on my driving when I had this going on. It's very difficult in very different in other walks of life. When you can go through stuff like that, you can mask it. If you have a more normal job and you're sending emails, people don't necessarily know, but when cameras are on you and the difference between you being great and average is 1/10 or 2/10, I became a Sam Bird that was 2/10 slower. And with that came more pressure, more scrutiny. Then you try harder, and it became very difficult. Obviously, then the top brass at Jaguar, I think, as much as they put their arm around me, a lot of the focus switched to Mitch, and it was very much Mitch's team, and deservedly so. But it became pretty clear that it was the right thing to do to move on. And once I got the opportunity to join McLaren with Ian and Zach, it was a very quick and easy decision. Zach called me, "Do you want to come join?" "Yep, let's do it." And 24 hours later, the contract was signed, and I was ready to go and ready to wear papaya.
And how does it feel wearing papaya, such an iconic colour in motorsport? So much.
Well, the colour suits me, doesn't it? I mean, it suits
bright orange goes with bright blonde hair.
With all it goes with the sunbeds and it goes with the hair. What can I say? As a brand, it's the best brand I could possibly wish to work for. The atmosphere in the team is great. I hope, Georgina, you're listening in. Yeah. No, it really is. They are a very hard-working group of individuals. Remember this team is basically the same team that won multiple world championships in its former guise as Mercedes. But it's now it's a manufacturer team without full manufacturer status. We are effectively a customer team to Nissan. But it was still a great opportunity to join one of the best brands within motorsport, a team that I used to drive by on a pretty much a daily basis when I lived down the road in West Byfleet. The team is based in Woking with MTC. I'm an extremely lucky racing driver to call McLaren my home.
And then, of course, let's move on to that race in Sao Paulo, because obviously all eyes were on you to I'm sure there was a little bit of pressure there to bring home some results. But talk us through that win and describe that last lap.
Oh, how long we got, Nikki? No, it was going back to the beginning of the season. Mexico was challenging, and we understood why. We then went to Saudi, and we made some really good progress. Narrowly missing out on a podium in race 1. Race 2 actually was the race that really excited me moving forwards. Although I didn't finish because I nicked a wall with the front right, and it bent a steering arm on the front right. I think I was 3 or 4% up on most of the field while carving my way through up to 6th from 13th. We were down in 13th purely because there was a red flag in qualifying, and it came out about 2 seconds too early. If it had come out 2 seconds later, I would have crossed the line, and I think I would have been fastest or second quickest in my group. But look, these things happen. And that really excited myself and the team that we were going in the right direction. So homework was done over the 5 or 6 week gap. Got to Brazil and we topped free practice. We made it through to Super Pole. I think I was 5th or 6th on the grid. And we know that Sao Paulo is a peloton style race. I think we just raced very well, very smart. I found myself leading most of the race, which I think I wasn't supposed to. I didn't want to, but because everybody else kind of let me lead. But I was like, okay, well, I'm conserving a lot of energy. I'm not doing. I've learned from what Stoffel did last year, and I'm not. I'm kind of staying within the energy range that I need to be in order to have a fighting chance at the end. Mitch overtook me with, I think, 6 or 7 laps to go, which I was really happy about because then I could save a little bit going towards the end of the race and get me back on level par with him. And then I think it was like 2 laps to go. I noticed that he was starting to struggle with temperature. You can tell that by the power delivery mid-phase of the straight of the car in front and their lift points. So he was not able to deploy full power and having to lift slightly earlier. And I was like, well, if he's really in trouble now, I've got a chance. The Jaguar out of corners is amazing. So getting close to him out of corners was very difficult. But at the end of some of the straights, it was now possible to have a go. And yeah, on the last lap, obviously, I got very, very close through a section that I'd been quite strong at all through the day. A section where there's 2 right-handers in a row at the other end of the circuit, and then was able to have a go around the outside into the second last corner.
Sam, in terms of Formula E and where it sits in your career, you've been involved in it for 10 years, which is the majority of your career, really. I mean, it's amazing to think now that it's been a mainstay of your career. You've been a great asset to it. It's given you a lot as well. How do you summarise the last decade, and not just about your own career, but what Formula E has brought to international motorsport?
Let's do personally first. Personally, it gave me a career. Without Formula E, I might be in a gym somewhere thinking if only I'd been given an opportunity. I mean, it was that close. So it gave me a job. It's taken me around the world multiple times. It's given me some incredible memories that if we were doing a video call, you'd see behind me, I've got a load of trophies that when I look at, it's not just a shiny piece of metal. It's a memory of a certain period or a certain time, a certain race, and look back on and remember and see like a live screenshot in my head, a live video playing of that specific race, remember certain things about it, and it puts a smile on my face. So for me, it's given me a lot of joy, a lot of happiness. Yeah, there's been some downtimes, there's been some difficulties, but there are in everybody's job or, certain periods in their life. But on the whole, it's been one heck of a ride. And the ride hasn't finished yet, guys. We're talking about it like the ride's finished. There's there's definitely still
10 more years, Sam.
There's
10 more years.
definitely still. There's definitely, trust me, there's still speed in this boy. So, it's been an amazing ride, and I've loved every single second of it. I've got to meet some incredible people. On a Formula E side, I think Formula E, Alejandro Gag, Alberto Longo, Jean Todt, and countless other people have created something very special. And it was seen as a little bit of a laughing stock at the beginning. As you discussed, the beginning at Donington, the lack of speed in the cars. But as the years have gone on, people have taken it more and more seriously. And now it's an extremely attractive series for fans, for world-class racing drivers, for world-class teams, for manufacturers. It's a breeding ground of technology that manufacturers use to improve their EV technology and put that onto the production line to make EV cars of the future have better range, go faster. It's a bona fide world championship now. And to be a part of it from the beginning, when it was what it was, to now is a very cool thing. There's only, I think, 4 of us. I'm sure you guys will be speaking to them as well. Antonio, myself, Lucas, and Seb. Unfortunately, the other and Jev, Jev as well. Yeah, Jev. Unfortunately for me, the others have all been champions. I've come close, but I think I've won more races than quite a few of them. Or we're all very close on race wins. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you're right up there. Sam, it's been an amazing 10 years, and I don't think, if we've been honest with ourselves, at Donington, if someone had said we'd be doing this podcast in 10 years' time, we would have thought that they were talking sense. But 10 more years, and I can't wait to see you out in Gen 4.
Well, yeah, mate, if I'm out in 10 years' time, then that'd be quite remarkable, wouldn't it? I'll be full of Botox and all sorts.
I'll wheel you out in your Zimmer frame.
Can I just say, though, guys, so I've actually just come back from a Verano test with the 3.5. Have you guys seen a 3.5 yet launch off the line?
Impressive, is it?
Oh, my God.
Really?
It goes.
Yes.
It's gone. It is gone. And out of the corners, when you use 350 all-wheel drive, it disappears.
Now I'm excited.
It's by far the fastest thing I've sat in from 0 to 60.
Oh,
really?
Yes.
By far. It will leave everything for dust.
Do you know what the 0 to 60 is?
It feels like 0. It just goes. It gets there before I even think about it. No, but it's
there you are. That's your instant facelift done.
Yeah, but it just shows that Formula E is trying to improve all the time. The technology is improving. We are getting to the stage now where these cars are very, very quick. And Gen 3.5 absolutely demonstrates that.
Brilliant. Well, can't wait for that. Thank you so much for your time, Sam. And we'll see you at the beginning of season 11.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Take it easy.
In the early Gen 1 day, and basically all the time up until, as Sam says himself about that difficult period he had when he was at Jaguar there, he was a real factor. I remember that win he had in Buenos Aires and that dual motor DS Virgin, which was a brilliant against the odds victory. So why didn't you mention Sam in your hierarchy of great Formula E drivers there, Sam?
Oh no, he definitely. So Sam Bird deserves to be in that sort of pantheon of drivers that have achieved great things in Formula E. His stats and his results definitely attest to that. I thought he spoke really eloquently and openly about his difficulties, and we do often forget, don't we, that we put these guys on a pedestal, and we ultimately we revere them for what they do, their skills that they have, and they get well paid and they get the glory, and they sign autographs and they've got a fan base and they have a great lifestyle. But when you go behind the stage and behind the scenes, as we do, you see how bloody hard work it is, not just at the track, but back at the factory, back in the sim, PR days, lots of requests on your time, and you forget that. Well, you don't forget, but you don't realise that they have just the same challenges in their life and difficulties sometimes and tough periods. And I thought Sam was very eloquent in the way that he talked about some of his there. So yeah, I think with that in mind, I think there's sort of a new perspective on what Sam has achieved, and it's been a tough journey, as he said. And I think the Jaguar thing, I think ultimately he achieved some amazing results. The New York win was one of the best in Formula E. You know, shunting the car one day and writing it off, and then a rebuild, and then going to win a race 24 hours later is amazing. But ultimately, it came down to going up against Mitch Evans, an incumbent in that team, one of the pioneers of the early days of Jaguar, and it just proved a little bit too much amongst all those other things that Sam talked about. But when you look at his career as a whole, from the start with DS, Virgin Racing, and then it became DS Virgin, didn't it? Going through to the Jaguars and now Neom. First of all, the staying power of keeping in the championship and doing it at the into his late 30s and winning a race last season. And he was one of those drivers, wasn't he? I think up until season 6, probably, he was I think he was the only driver who had scored a win in each of the first 6 seasons, which is an amazing stat as well. So yeah, he is one of the group of top drivers in the championship. Not quite the Jev, not got a genuine, not really had a big genuine title opportunity. I mean, season 4, he was always the underdog and fighting, punching up at Jev and the points he got that season. But yeah, he deserves a lot of respect and credit, and I don't think anyone has anything other than that for Sam Bird and what he's done in Formula E.
So Bird is one of a very small number of drivers who's won in each of the 3 generations of car. As you mentioned earlier, Gen 3 has produced this much closer, I guess probably unintentional style of racing. This isn't what they were intending when they designed Gen 3, was it? They were trying to fix the problem of overly aggressive banger racing, you might call it, that Gen 2 had descended into, although as I said earlier, I really didn't have a problem with any of it, to be honest. So was it an overreaction that led to Gen 3 creating the racing that we've seen for these past couple of seasons?
Yeah, I think it probably was. I think there was just a few decisions that didn't quite go the way that the decision makers thought they were going to go, mixed with the after effects of the pandemic. Not to use it as an excuse, it's just the reality of the situation, in the sense that supply chains were affected. There was the financial regulations which had to be tied into how Gen 3 were run by the manufacturers and the teams, but at the same time there was a sense that the project wasn't managed as well as it could have been, in lots of senses, mainly technical. And I think that the lessons of that have been learnt, or we'll find that out, won't we, in Gen 4 in particular. But the notion that they didn't need any rear traction brakes, that was proved in a sense that yes, they didn't need them, but
the brakes are off.
In emergencies, they sure as hell did need some, and that was found out the hard way. But I think
Sam had one of the bigger ones, didn't he?
He did, yeah, a big shunt at Califat, which I remember reporting on, and then seeing pictures of Taya Pucher halfway up a grass bank at Califat, and it all got a bit scary, I think, for some of the drivers. And then there were little things that weren't found out in the mule test the Spark did. Really sort of simple things like the mirrors. You couldn't see anything out the mirrors. Well, that should have been discovered in the initial testing, shouldn't it? I mean, it was things like that sort of pointed to a tightening of the project management, I think, for the next rule set. But I think ultimately what Gen 3 brought was obviously a new type of racing, which we've seen over the first 2 seasons. I think overall they kind of got away with some of the challenges which they had to address, and they got back on a sure footing. The races last season, the first year of Gen 1, were generally really good. And then we got this sort of pack racing element where we got a sort of single-seater Talladega NASCAR situation, which we'd never seen before, and it was just new. And occasionally it goes too far. We've talked about this ad nauseum, haven't we, about how to structure it properly. But Gen 3 is distinct. There's no. You can say what you want about the negative aspects of it and the difficulties and the wrong turns that some of the wrong turns that the FIA and Formula E went down. But at the end of the day, it's produced some fantastic racing, 2 close championships, multiple winners, multiple title combatants, and it is completely distinct from the first 2 generations. So, yep, it was painful, but it kind of got there in a sense in the end.
One element of this that we haven't really covered off, and that's from the team's perspective. Obviously, an enormous amount of evolution there. Remember the very first launch up at Donington, where they all had this like horseshoe, where all the teams would be based out there, and gradually, one by one, they've all sort of gone off to pastures new and set up their own lovely high-tech facilities. So who better than to sort of talk us through how Formula E has changed from a team's perspective than somebody who's been around right from the very beginning? And that's Andretti's Roger Griffiths, who Sam spoke to a couple of days before we recorded this.
So, Roger, it seems barely credible that a decade has passed since Formula E began. Andretti, one of the founding fathers of the championship, you've been in it since the very beginning, and actually a bit of prehistory as well. You were one of the people who made the Andretti Formula E team a reality. Tell us a bit about the first time you heard about Formula E and how it was essentially sold to you, and then I presume that you were selling it to Michael and various other parties within the Andretti mothership, were you not?
Yeah, I mean, when I think back over it, I jumped ship from Honda to Andretti at the early part of 2014, and Formula E really wasn't on my radar. Although I knew that Michael had some meetings with Alejandro and Ali Russell, and there'd been some exploratory visits over to Spark and to what was Williams at the time, just to understand a bit more. And Michael said to me, well, I'd really like you to take a more serious look at this Formula E program. And my initial reaction, being a bit of a petrolhead, was electric motorsport. What on earth are we thinking? He explained his reasons behind why he wanted Andretti to look at it, and it was, around about diversifying our racing programs and not having all of our eggs in one basket with IndyCar. So I thought, okay, that's fair comment. And I remember going over to Donington and seeing the workshops there for the first time. The team was sort of up and running, just about. We had a few staff on board, predominantly mechanics, and they were looking at, the fit out of the workshop, but we hadn't seen a car yet. And I remember getting some WhatsApp messages around, the car's just arrived, and it was just a whole pile of bits. But really what got my interest was attending the first test, the shakedown test that we had at Donington when everybody got up and running. And it wasn't necessarily about the performance of the car, which I think we'd all acknowledge at the start was fairly shocking, very, very slow. It was really around the individuals involved. And, what I took from that was if there were people like Sir Frank Williams at the time, Alain Prost, Emerson Fittipaldi was there, and Michelin and any number of those companies. I thought if these people are prepared to put their their name to this and their reputations, there's got to be something there. There's got to be something to this. And as an engineer, I could understand the attraction at looking at something different. But as I say, I mean, the performance of the car was, I mean, I think a decently driven road car would have been quicker than the very first time we ran the Formula E car. And I remember quite quickly, I think we'd done the morning session with the car and we were at 133 kilowatts or something, which is a long way from where we are today. And, you know, even Alejandro was quite perturbed at how slow we were. And there was a request went into Williams/McLaren, which were providing the powertrain at the time. Can we run at 150 kilowatts? We've got to do something. This is so bad. And, you know, lo and behold, that afternoon, they'd upped the power level and, you know, the lap times obviously responded to that. But I wasn't deterred from that. And it was really, I came back from it, said, I think there's something here. And I feel a level of confidence that this championship could work. But there's a lot that needs to be fixed. But I think the foundation is okay. And from there, that's where, you know, we as Andretti said, okay, we're fully in. We actually hosted, Michael hosted Alejandro part of the Indy 500 week. And I remember Michael saying to me, called me and said, there's this guy called Alejandro Agag. He's down at the Speedway. Can you bring him over to the workshop? And I had no idea what Alejandro looked like. And anyhow, I found him wandering around in the garage area of the Indianapolis Speedway. And I drove him over to our facility. And, you know, he sort of laid out his plans and his ambitions to us. And, you know, we were sold and we were on board from that point.
I remember in the early days, there was always talk of a roadmap, the technical roadmap. I mean, when you were in that summer and you started testing, Roger, was it just all hands to the pump just to get to Beijing and just get this thing reasonably credible? Or was there thinking then, even at that stage, about what was to come in season 2? How sort of hand to mouth was it in that period? Was it really quite fraught heading to China?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, for sure it was fraught. I remember, you know, one of the things that got us to Beijing was the immense amount of collaboration between the 10 teams that we had. And I've never seen that before in you know, prior to that or since. And I remember having a conversation with Nigel Beresford, who was at Dragon at the time. And we were talking about the gearboxes and, you know, we were having the challenges with the gearbox, which was basically a Formula 3-esque gearbox. And, you know, the challenges were numerous. And, you know, we talked about how do we make this gearbox last a bit better, you know, because the regulations say we can't do anything to it. And Nigel and I came up with a plan of we need to do some stuff to the internals. We need to get, you know, various bits super finished because it's the only way we're going to get gears and shafts and things like that to last a race, let alone a season. So we took that to, you know, Formula E, to Carlos and to the FIA and said, look, we don't want to open up gearboxes to development, but we think there's a minimum amount of things that need to be done just to make this thing last. So that's just an example of how we got the cars going and up to speed. And then I can't remember exactly when it was, but I can't remember if it was pre the first race or post the first race, but there was the FIA hosted a meeting in Paris and all of the Formula E teams and prospective manufacturers went there, and we talked about what are we going to do for the next steps of Formula E. We know that for season 1 we have a spec car, and we know that there's a desire to open it up, but we didn't know going into that meeting what opening it up meant. And Laurent and his fellow technical guys showed a plan for the next 5 years of what they wanted to do on a year-by-year basis. And I remember the very first plan included from season 3 opening up batteries for competition. And, you know, that for me was a bit of an eye-opener because in all of the other championships I've worked in, I've never really seen that level of attention given to what are we going to do and how we're going to evolve over an annual basis, looking out the next 5 years. So I was quite encouraged by the work that had gone in, and it was incremental steps, and it was predominantly aligned with the types of activities that were going on with road cars as well. So it wasn't too far out of whack of what was actually achievable. So, to be presented that at the very first technical working group meeting, if you like, or manufacturer meeting was quite encouraging.
Did you need a roadmap for your drivers as well in that first season, Roger? Because it's a great quiz question for anyone, for all our listeners. What if Frank Montani, Jean-Eric Vergne, Charles Pic, Matthew Brabham, Marco Andretti, Scott Speed, the late great Justin Wilson, and Simona de Silvestri all got in common? They all drove for you in season one. I mean, you started the season with Frank and Charles.
Yeah. Charles lasted one race.
Charlotte lasted one race. Yeah. Frank lasted two.
Yeah.
And by Punta del Este, you had Jean-Eric Vergne in the car. And I remember clearly, and I spoke to Jean-Eric, and he appears on this episode as well, talking about that when he strode into the paddock, and he was miserable as hell because his Formula One career had come to an end at Toro Rosso, and he didn't really fancy these pretty rudimentary Formula E cars. And then he goes and sticks it on pole, and a great career was born with your team. I mean, you must remember that pretty clearly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a backstory there. So we went to Punta thinking it was going to be Frank and Jev, and we actually ended up racing Jev and Matthew Brabham. I remember landing in Punta to my phone just buzzing like crazy, and when we got the news that Frank was no longer going to be able to drive for us, and having numerous discussions with, I think it was the ex-Ferrari head of PR that was working for Formula E at the time, about how we were going to manage this situation and what it was that we were going to do. But in parallel to that, we had Jev in the team, like you said, I mean, he was pretty disillusioned. He didn't really want to be driving the car. But I think when he got behind the wheel, his competitive nature took over. And I think he's one of these guys, if he's given a shopping trolley to race, he's going to race it. And as you say, I mean, he put it on pole. And then he was having a really strong fight with Buemi, I believe it was. And then, unfortunately, one of the Achilles heels of the Gen 1 car, the early Spark car, was some of the front suspension wasn't as strong as it needed to be. And unfortunately, that failed on our car with a lap or two to go. And people said, well, he would never have made it on energy. And actually, he was in a pretty decent position on energy. And I think he could have challenged for the win, which would have been a great, boost to his own self-confidence. But I think going there, having been in a relatively uncompetitive car in Formula One, and then putting it on pole, was like, oh, I can drive. I got my confidence back. There are actually some really strong drivers in this paddock. Right, the car might be crap, but the competition's here. And I think from that point on, he engaged. I mean, it's funny, you're going back to that list of drivers. I was in Banbury this past week, and in our hallway, we have a photograph of all of the drivers that have driven for Andretti. And I think we're up to 19 drivers now.
I was going to say, that's a long haul.
Including Nico. Hallway. It is. And they're also small photographs. So, and I was looking at we have a picture, obviously, of the late Justin Wilson, and who I drove for us in Moscow. And, I was just thinking back to that, and his comments about Formula E, and you always think of it very affectionately about his time with us, which unfortunately was very short. But our philosophy was always to have a championship driver, and that was Montagny, because he'd driven for us in the sports car program and won some races with us back in the late 2000s. And then it was going to, we had this plan to revolve some of the IndyCar drivers through the second seat. Ultimately, really only Marco got to drive it, but there was a plan to bring, some of the others in as well, maybe Ryan or whoever else was driving for us at the time. It never really came to it. But yeah, it was always the intention to have that change in drivers. Then, ironically, for season 2, the Andretti driver change rule was brought in, which limited the number of driver changes you could make during the course of the season. Yeah. So I wonder if the TV graphics people got fed up of trying to keep up with who's in the car.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, at the end of season 1, Simona got in the car, and I remember you announcing that for season 2 that there was going to be this ATEC powertrain, which was Andretti Technologies, and a host of suppliers, technical suppliers. Houston Mechatronics is the one that I seem to remember. There's a few, wasn't there?
HMI.
That's right, yeah. And it didn't work out. Season 2, I remember you testing at Donington, and it was clear that there were some issues, and that must have been probably one of the most difficult parts of the last decade, Roger. I mean, trying to recalibrate after that, going back to the original Spark car, that there must have been some tough lessons learned then.
Yeah, I mean, it was a hugely ambitious project. I mean, we, not only did we take on the design of the whole of the car or the whole of the rear of the powertrain, but we actually took on the design of the individual components. And, whilst the apt group put together a really nice package, it was Schaeffler that designed the motor, and Schaeffler had a ton of electric motor experience, et cetera, et cetera. In our case, we were designing the electric motor. So I was out in Germany talking to companies like Vacuum Schmelzer about what kind of steel we needed for the rotor and for the layers in the stator and things like that, and coming up with ways on how to wind an electric motor. So we were a very small group. It was a massively ambitious project, but the reason that we had to go this very detailed path was because we didn't have the finances, the funding to go to Magneti Marelli, for example, at the time, and just buy off the shelf a competition electric motor. And because there weren't too many options at that time. And, there was a lot of advanced technology. I mean, we were one of the first people to do a carbon rear casing. And that was in our season 2 powertrain, which never made it. We had silicon carbide switches inside the inverter before many other people did. So we were really pushing the technology, but it was just too much for too small a group. And, I remember the first time we made a lap of Donington and the car actually reappeared back in the pit lane. There was a huge cheer went up. And also people would see when the Andretti car went out, they stayed in the garage because they knew that more often than not, there was going to be a red flag to tow us back in. But it was certainly, it was character building. It was soul destroying. It was all of those things. We certainly learned an awful lot. And to be honest, when we were finally successful in developing the ATEC powertrain for season 3, much of what we had done for season 2 actually carried over into the season 3 powertrain. So, the work wasn't lost. It was just too much for too few people, at the start.
And in those early, I think in the first season, I remember you telling me, Roger, that you met with, I think it was Adam Baker, wasn't it, who was then with BMW. Yeah. And that sort of started very, very slowly and very subtly, this connection with BMW, which sort of bore fruit really at the tail end, or the third and fourth seasons in particular. And then they came on board officially, and you became a factory entity in a sense with BMW Andretti. Tell us a bit about that, how that was formed and what the plan was, because it was. I mean, covert isn't the right way, but you weren't completely public with everything immediately, were you?
No, I mean, we made contact with BMW actually before I was really involved in the program, and then I sort of followed up on it. And Adam and I had a number of telephone conversations, and I was keeping him appraised of how things were going through testing. And, then we had the first race, and we were fortunate enough to I think we finished 2nd and 4th in the first race. And I said to Adam, I said, look, I don't know what else I can say to you to convince you to come and look at Formula. I said, the only thing I can suggest is, look, why don't you come to Malaysia, to Putrajaya? Just come hang out with the team. Know conditions. Let's just have a look from the inside. And he's like, okay, that's fair enough. So he brought another one of his engineers with him, and the other engineer sort of hung out in our garage, just observing really. And Adam, cruised up and down the pit lane and spoke to everybody, FIA, the promoter, etc. And he came away from it. He said, that was quite useful. How about we give you this other engineer? He's not going to come to races, but or he will come to a few, and then he'll do a report, and let's just learn from it. And I said, look, fine, I'll give you all our data. I don't care. You can have it all. You can make a decision whether you want to come in or not, but I'll give you access. And that's how it started in season 1, race 2. And then from there, they then provided a couple of engineers with racing and engineering experience, and we got access to some of their control systems guys. We talked about strategies, and so through season 2 into season 3, the program grew. In season 3 and season 4, we actually had some BMW branding on the car, and it was more of a commercial exercise than anything else. And then obviously from season 5 onwards, we were full factory team.
Yeah.
So, the BMW relationship started at the second race.
By Gen 2, the first race of Gen 2 in Saudi Arabia, you got pole position and won the first ever Gen 2 race with Antonio Felix da Costa. And it was such a dramatic start to the season because, you look really good. You were in the box seat at Marrakesh. And then it all pivoted with that slightly unfortunate skirmish between Alexander Sims and Antonio Felix da Costa. But I remember you saying at the time that as dramatic and as disastrous as that was, it kind of galvanized something in the team. There were pole positions after that, but there wasn't a win, and it kind of fell away a bit as everyone was learning about Gen 2. Again, that must be one of the key sort of memories of your decade in Formula E.
Yeah, going back to the win, I remember, I don't know if you recall this, but when Antonio pulled up on the grid, he pulled up outside his box, and he was reversing on the grid from pole position to get into his box. And I'm just like, no, please don't get us disqualified before we even started the race. But anyhow, we succeeded there. And I personally think if we had not had the coming together in Marrakesh and we'd have finished first and second like we should have done, that would have been a very different season 5 championship. I think it got inside the drivers' heads a little bit, although we dealt with it very quickly. We dealt with it there and then at the racetrack. We got out in front of the press, out in front of the media, and admitted our mistake and all the rest of it. But I think if we'd have had that win, then we may well have romped away to the championship. But because we didn't get it, we all started questioning ourselves, and myself included, and it got away from us there.
Around a year later, I remember speaking to you at Valencia and asking you about the exit of Audi, which had just broken at the pre-season test, and then I think the next natural question was, what's the future with BMW? And you genuinely at the time didn't know what the future. Sort of a week later or a few days later, I think it was, wasn't it? This kind of shock came from BMW that they were following Audi out of the championship. Shock is the word, isn't it? That must have been, a nasty shock for you and the team.
Yeah, I think it was season 7, wasn't it? The start of season 7.
It was,
And Audi exited, and I remember driving up from Valencia to Madrid to catch a flight, and I got to the hotel in Madrid to hear that BMW had pulled out, and we had no notice, and even the BMW comms team weren't aware of what had happened. We'd had a call from Marcus Flash about 20 minutes before the notice or the information went out publicly, and he just basically called up Michael and said, just wanted to let you know we're pulling out. all right, any questions? No? All right, thanks. And just hung up. And because previously all of our dealings had been with Jens Marquardt, and Jens wasn't in control at that point. And I think it would have been very different had Jens been part of it. But it was a huge shock. We just went into damage limitation mode because it went out before we had the opportunity to tell the drivers, because we just signed Jake Dennis. And I remember being in the airport the following morning, calling Jake and saying, welcome to Andretti BMW. You know that they've just announced that they're pulling out. Don't worry about it. We'll find a way to work this out. And it was, I've never seen anything quite like it. And I had the BMW Motorsport guys calling me to apologize for how this happened. And they were absolutely distraught that it had been communicated in such a vicious manner, if you like. And it was not great.
Pretty brutal. But actually, when you look back at that, Roger, and the way that you pivoted and sort of re-established Andretti, it actually sort of laid the foundations for what you achieved in season 9, wasn't it? Which was Jake becoming champion and you sort of having your most successful season at the start of Gen 3.
Yeah, I mean, we were very fortunate that Mike Crack took over the running of the BMW Motorsport program, and Mike and I were able to concoct a deal that retained us the BMW powertrain through season 8, something that we knew quite well, but we also knew that BMW were going to pull out the number of engineers that they provided. So we went on a pretty hard recruitment drive and managed to find really what is the core of the team today. And, I identified that software was going to be probably the key battleground going forward. So we built a very strong software team, which also included the strategy group. And that really set us up. We had the luxury of running a powertrain that we were quite familiar with as we were integrating new engineers into the team. Jake had to step up very quickly to be that lead driver. I think the groundwork that we did in season 8 really paid off in season 9.
And then that continues now, obviously, with Porsche for the duration of Gen 3 and potentially beyond. We'll have to wait and see on that one. I mean, that brings us up to date, really, Roger. We've only got a small amount of time left, unfortunately. But just give us a bit of a summary of... let's talk about highlights. I mean, there's some obvious ones that we've just touched on there, taking the title with Jake. But just looking at Formula E from the outside, you've got a lot of experience, as many of us have, in the paddock of different types of racing for yourself, particularly sports car racing and IndyCar. But beyond that, how do you sort of compartmentalize Formula E? What's been achieved as a community, in a sense, that everybody has been bringing things to the party of growing this great championship and this level of competition, which is right up there in world motorsport in terms of how competitive it is and how professional it is. What do you think has really made it the success in the sporting terms that it's become since it started?
Yeah, I think the key differentiator has been the willingness and the friendship between the teams. So many championships become vicious battlegrounds, cutthroat almost. And yes, we are super strong competitors on the track, but away from the track, we're friends. And I think first and foremost, we're able to put aside our individual competitive needs and nature to work for the greater good of the championship. And, I saw firsthand in the 2 years that I spent as chairman of Vitama, how I could get everybody to pull in the same direction, to want to come up with solutions to the problems rather than just keep generating problems. And, a willingness to pick the right battles, the things that we were truly passionate about, that we wanted to to resolve and to work with the FIA or to work with Formula E to find answers to the questions that we had. And the fact that, that was something started at Donington before we even were racing for the first time, and it continues today, I think has been something that no other championship has got. I mean, if you look at Formula One, if you look at IndyCar racing, I mean, I've never seen a group of team principals or owners, or however you want to refer to them as, work together for the collective good of all of us. And I think for me, that's probably the biggest takeaway of why Formula E has succeeded.
Very good encapsulation there, Roger. Yeah, completely agree with that. It is something that's quite unique in the depth of the sort of the camaraderie, and it's it's a pleasure to go racing within it. And let's hope there's another decade to come. It would be great if they can achieve that, and these things get faster, and the paddock becomes even more competitive. So thanks very much for joining us, Roger. It's terrific to chat. Good luck for preparations for the new season with your new driver, Nico Muller. Let's hope you don't have 8 of them this season. I doubt that very much. But I'm sure you'll just have a
I certainly hope not. But no, well, thanks for having me. So very, very happy to be here.
Roger, friend of the show, of course. Always good to get his perspective on it. Andretti have had an interesting journey, haven't they, Sam, from working with some sort of NASA tech company on that season 2 powertrain that never ran, to winning the championship as a Porsche customer via an underperforming relationship with BMW. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I thought there's some really good insights there from Roger. Always a good one to give you a sort of rounded picture and really good recall on some of those key moments and milestones in Andretti's journey through 3 different rule sets so far. The BMW years, a bit complicated really. I think at times it was a really good relationship that they had. I always felt that BMW for a company
weren't committed enough.
Yeah, I mean for a company that got into Formula E, even in a sort of slightly covert sense, as Roger said, early doors, it should have achieved a lot more. It should have achieved a hell of a lot more. And then its withdrawal, as Roger said, was brutal. And, we know manufacturers can be a bit rude and they can split at any time. But this one was particularly, I can't remember the word that Roger used. You can go back and listen to it. But it was either brutal or kind of, a bit rude. And I think that kind of encapsulated a little bit about them in Formula E. It was, they were very kind of archaic in some areas of going Formula E racing. You were never quite sure it married up to their some of their brand. I think of the manufacturers that came into Formula E, they had the much more confused brand awareness or story that they were telling. It was never particularly clear to me, and speaking to some of their executives, that they really believed in Formula E. And I actually wasn't that surprised that they left. I was really surprised that Mercedes left. And I was...
Oh, and Audi as well.
Yeah, and surprised and disappointed that Audi went. But BMW, no, I wasn't. Even though it was as a shock to Roger and Andretti, I just never really felt that they believed why they were in it, and they really wanted to be in it. It just kind of clashed a little bit against what BMW was. But listen, we're old enough to remember the Paul Roche years and the big, leery, hairy turbos and things. To me, that's all I remember about BMW. I know they've got a big range of EV technology and products, but I never really got the whole BMW in Formula E thing.
No, to me, BMW are touring car racers, but maybe that shows my age.
Should we? Yeah, we need a little Dieter Quester anecdote here, don't we? Just to
Steve Saper.
Just to satisfy our legions of 58-year-olds that listen to this, probably.
So, a couple of drivers have spoken about Gen 3.5, the acceleration, and having 2 driven axles. it appears, and especially with a much stronger front wing, that Formula E is on a stronger footing again on that platform. The calendar, well, I know there's still a couple of bits and pieces, but that seems a little bit firmer. I guess now Jeff's just got to sort out the TV package, and we could say maybe it's starting to get back to where I think it was in that sort of pre-COVID time.
Yes, yeah. I think the indications are that Gen 3 Evo is going to be a decent chunk quicker than what we've seen so far in the last two seasons, 23 and 24. The acceleration's going to be a bit more pizzazz over that. I think that the active nature of the front powertrain, giving a four-wheel drive element, is going to be interesting in certain areas of the race. It remains to be seen exactly when they're going to use it, but we presume the start and in the dual phase of qualifying as at least two of the points where they'll use that. But the big one for me is Gen 4 and how that's going to pan out. It's going to be a massive challenge for the spec suppliers. I'm hearing at the moment that there are some big challenges, particularly on the battery front, in terms of packaging and getting reliability on that, which is one of the key areas of making Formula E what we know and love. So I think by the time early 2026 comes along, when the development testing and the performance testing is cranking up through the manufacturers, we'll get a gauge of where this project is at. But on paper, this should be a massive game changer for Formula E, particularly sporting and technical. I think the operational and the logistic facets of it will remain to be seen. Where they can race. Can they race comfortably on some of the street tracks we're seeing at the moment? I mean, Monaco's the litmus test for that, isn't it? But look, if Formula 1 can race around Monaco, Formula E can. And I anticipate that they're by Gen 4 that they won't be that far off F2 times. I think they'll be approaching that sort of level of performance and lap times around somewhere like Monaco, which will be fantastic. I think that will really
Oh, well, that's something worth shouting about.
Yeah, I think that'll capture new audiences. But I think even before that, we all know, and we mention time and time again, that it can't be a secret anymore. Formula E has to be front and centre, and it has to be out there, and it has to be aggressive. And it needs to start shouting about itself a bit more in areas whereby people can access it better, and that is the short-term challenge for Formula E, I think.
Well, 10 years on from now, Sam, I mean, loads of us who were there at the beginning didn't really think that it was going to last 10 years. We were just sort of enjoying it while we could, and if it was a success, that was brilliant. And if it went the way of A1 GP and Super League Formula, then so be it. That's softened the fate of so many new championships. Do you think that we'll get to season 20, or do you think it may well have been subsumed into some bigger Liberty Formula 1 electrified thing there? How do you envisage the next 10 years playing out?
Yeah, difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, the world's such a basket case anyway, isn't it? In many ways, it's hard to see. Who would have forecast the decade we've just had in terms of the ups and downs and the storylines? I mean, fantastic to cover, but what I can tell you is that if I'm still doing this at the age of what I will be, I won't disclose exactly, but you've got the permission to shoot me with a whaling harpoon if I'm still doing this in 10 years' time.
Our combined age will be so high that I don't think we'll be allowed to podcast anymore.
I doubt that Formula E will exist in its guise that it is at the moment in 10 years' time. No. There are many reasons for that, which would take us probably into a third hour of doing this podcast. But
should we do part 3? Why not? We're on a good thing.
I don't think the public can take that, can they? I doubt that it will exist purely because the landscape of motorsport will have moved on, and I think Formula 1 will always be, or certainly for the next 20, 30 years, will be king. I mean, interestingly, Gag and Todd and others did this kind of slightly sort of covert, not secret because it's out, but I've never seen an actual signed document or edict or anything alluding to it that they had a 25-year exclusivity, didn't they? Which doesn't mean a massive amount, other than they can protect what they've got their asset.
It's a bargaining tool in the. Isn't it?
Possibly, yeah.
It's a part of a negotiation.
Takes us to 2039, doesn't it? Which goes over the next decade, as we were talking about. But I just feel as though there will be an amalgamation of some description, or maybe even possibly a detuning of what electric motorsport might be. It will have a future, but I'm not sure it will be in the guise of a single-seater championship. I think I think that there will be massive challenges for Formula E if it doesn't break through into what they call this tier 1 sport, whereby the world sits up and takes notice. I think they're going to have to adopt something different, whether that is moves with the way that society is going, which is a very sort of minimal short burst of something and a massive showbiz event, which would make more sense for something like sort of Nitro Rallycross or Electro Rallycross, wouldn't it? Or a variant of. I see the world moving more in that direction rather than a city centre or a single-seater traditional. Well, Formula E isn't traditional, is it? But ultimately, it's a single-seater championship.
Well, it's 10 years now, so it is, yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. But let's not forget that when it began in 2014, I would think if you asked 100 people within the industry whether Formula E would last 10 years, 99 of them would have said no. So, taking that spirit, yeah, let's see. It might have a chance, but something tells me that it's probably got another couple of rule sets left before it becomes something else, or is folded into another part of motorsport, maybe.
Well, on that inspirational bombshell, Sam, I think at some point, because there's quite a while still now before the next race, we should do our all-time top 10 Formula E drivers and maybe Formula E races. We'll chuck that podcast out there. We'll get an hour out of that, no problem. Thank you all for listening. We really appreciate the support. 10 more years, maybe, but not with us. Anyway, goodbye.
The Athletic.
Get your football scores in a snap with the Apple Sports app. The free app for iPhone gives you access to real-time football scores, a dynamic drive tracker, and live play-by-play, all delivered ultra-fast. Plus, get team and player stats, standings, live betting odds, and more. Designed for speed and simplicity, the Apple Sports app is personalized and puts your favorite leagues, conferences, and teams front and center. Download Apple Sports now in the App Store in the US, Canada, and the UK. Get your football scores in a snap with the Apple Sports app. The free app for iPhone gives you access to real-time football scores, a dynamic drive tracker, and live play-by-play, all delivered ultra-fast. Plus, get team and player stats, standings, live betting odds, and more. Designed for speed and simplicity, the Apple Sports app is personalized and puts your favorite leagues, conferences, and teams front and center. Download Apple Sports now in the App Store in the US, Canada, and the UK.